see here. Here we go. So Bob, Shira, one of you guys want to go first? Doesn't matter. Rock, paper, scissors. Oh, looks like
Does
it's
that
Shira.
mean not it? Or,
That's you, Shira. Here.
All right. Why don't I talk about senior design project and just the experience of teaching a capstone design course. So I've done a little bit with senior design project in the past. When I first got to UMass, my first role was just like general whatever I wanted to do to help out with M5, the electrical and computer engineering makerspace. And what I quickly discovered was one of the main ways that students use this space is for senior design project. There's an interesting, way that M5 used to work, which is primarily, let's see, wait, I want to make it so I don't only see my own face. That was very awkward. Okay, that's better. I can see everyone now. It was that there were a group of students who were like really dedicated. I built my own motorcycle students, which we have, in ECE. You'd expect that student to be an ME, but he's an alum who actually is an ECE alum who built a motorcycle. And there are a whole bunch of students like that, but the majority of the students are studying really hard to get straight A's. And then they show up for their first design project and tear through the place looking for, how do I make this work and where are my parts? And they would primarily do that the second semester. I helped a lot of them out, but I thought, okay, I can see some things that need fixing here. So maybe I'll get a little bit more involved. So then I eventually kind of got more and more involved with the course, but I had to take some time away from that so I could work on the all-campus makerspace. And then the all-campus makerspace launched for a very short experimental period and the pandemic started. So during the pandemic, it didn't make a lot of sense to have the all-campus makerspace running because it was very much all about walk-ins. It was trying to get interdisciplinary students from all over campus to come in, and we did that primarily by having them come to the physical space. And now almost all of them weren't even in the local area. So, but all the electrical and computer engineering students were in the local area. They were all enrolled in a face-to-face class senior design project, and I had a lot of time, a lot of expertise. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to push really hard with the other course coordinators and try to make this better than I think people are expecting, because pandemic, I think that the expectations during the pandemic are that everything's going to be a letdown, because there's so much that, the students, they were receiving answers that were basically, no, you can't. And interestingly enough, we learned a lot of things that I think were, because of the pandemic, we did a better job. For example, we used Slack for the first time. And one of the difficulties I always had was I had no clue what any of the students were doing. I would see them for a very brief period and I couldn't really follow up with them. And now I can see every purchase order. I know everything. I can tell, I can give you a score. I could probably write a little AI to tell you who's going to get an A based on simply a bunch of little metrics. Do you place your orders early? Do you do good time management, right? Those kinds of meta skills that from an early stage are evident. And I could make interventions as we went. I could make little interventions via Slack that were way better than waiting for that one check-in. So there's the schedule, the website's all public. You can check it out. Make sure that, let's see, which screen am I sharing?
I got a calendar.
Yeah, okay. So the way it works, this is a little bit of a different semester because of the pandemic affecting the course, the entire calendar for the university. But basically, we have weekly lectures sometimes. And those lectures are really mostly soft stuff. We'll have guest lectures, we'll have some administrative logistics, but it's never specific because every student's project is unique. Every student, so there are 31 teams, and let me just kind of go over the structure. There are 31 teams, and each team has 4 students, sometimes 5, sometimes 3, but generally speaking 4, and they work the whole year. So this is actually 2 courses. It's a fall semester course and a spring semester course. It's pretty unique, and it's really rigorous in that regard. So each group has a faculty advisor and 2 evaluators, and they go through 4 major design reviews. And there's it's all leading towards this demo days, this final report, and then demo days, which happened last Friday. Yeah. And so the major thing that we're going to focus on for next year is thinking about how people come up with ideas. I think most people are under the impression that brainstorming is not work. So if the advisors and the final project idea is due on this week, then these weeks are often, the mental space of the students is taken up with I don't know, moving into your dorm, right? So one of the things we're going to be focusing on is how do we get people to really care, and really see this as this is actively spending a couple hours every day thinking about your project, because it's not work until you have to choose what to do. And just like teaching, you know, people those things. Some students get it intuitively, and some students, they figure it out just a little bit later than they'd like for their deadlines. And so in this stage, we try to get them to commit to system specifications, to talk about what they're going to build and what it's going to do, what it's going to achieve, to lay out a very rough preliminary design. And then we go all the way until November before we see a prototype, which is one of the reasons is we had to move everything around because of the pandemic. So all the like benchmarks and things weren't ideal, were somewhat informed by like pandemic scheduling. And this meant that there were some periods where students had to really rush to get stuff done. And given all of that, I really like to say that they all did a really admirable job. You know, some of the teams weren't actually all local, they were half remote. And so there were some really interesting uses of, you know, anything from shipping packages to like contactless pickup to, you know, uses of Zoom, uses of other teleconferencing stuff, just to make the team work. And then we had a 2-week shutdown in the middle of the spring semester, which was really difficult. And that meant that students couldn't even access the lab. So previously students could access the lab if they reserved time to use the lab. And then all of a sudden there's this 2-week period, which we didn't know would only last for 2 weeks. It was like, hopefully only going to last for 2 weeks. And it ultimately did. And that really impacted everything. So we pushed our 3rd design review back so that it ended up being this week, the week of the 29th of March, which was only very, very short to the final last design review. So it started to push things together. Anyway, all that's pretty boring, but it's just to give you a sense of the framework of this course and what the students go through. What we're also doing is the department has recently added a junior design project course. So the idea is to really prepare students better by giving them earlier exposures to these kinds of skills. And these kinds of skills are I mean, I don't have to preach to the choir. You all know how important they are. So duh. And so, yeah, so let's just look at the project. So the projects are really fun. Some of these, I'll just describe a couple of them so you get a sense of like what people are doing. They do all have to have a hardware component. They all have to have a custom printed circuit board. We really pushed that this year and we had really good success. The students, by and large, all of them succeeded in creating a functional PCB. And some of them were very, very complex and went through several revisions. So we have, let's see, some fun ones. This one trains you to play the guitar. There are strips of lights under the frets, and basically you play and it listens to what you played, and then it gives you feedback at the end. This one here is a umpire for baseball. So there's a system. Let's scroll through for a moment. And these students built this like prototype here where they're going to, I don't know much about baseball, but I guess touch the base and then catch the ball. And then taking a look at the data, the curves will be superimposed for the accelerometers inside of each of these and the load cells inside of each of these systems. And then the system will make a prediction about, well, it's a little bit hard to see because it was a blurry shot there of the screen, but make a prediction about whether the runner was out or not. And then also show you the data so you can interpret it for yourself. Let's see if we can get a clearer view here. Yeah, so basically you get the accelerometer from the glove and the load cells from the base. There's also this this project here is a diabetic shiver alert. So if you get shivers, I guess you want to be notified if it had to do with your diabetes, then you shouldn't be shivering. It's a bad sign. So this one would they made a flexible PCB version, but they didn't get that one quite working. So this is just a hard PCB version of a wearable that you would wear on your arm or shoulder. It would alert you if you had a shiver. Some other ones worth mentioning, there's lots of really cool ones. Loadout is a suitcase with the Thing Magic Jadak, RFID, like long range RFID. It's about $100. It's a really cool device. Actually, I want to pull that up. It's come on the scene a couple of years ago, maybe. SparkFun sells a development board for it. We had like 3 or 4 projects that made use of this, including a parking system, this suitcase system, and a cornhole game. And so basically there's a series of tags and let's see. we were talking about loadout, right? So a series of tags, stickers you can put on your items for your, and then you tell your app what you want to pack for this trip, and your suitcase knows what's in the bag. And it can also tell you if like someone tampered with your suitcase, if your suitcase was dropped by the TSA, etc. We had this automated chessboard, which you can play against someone on the internet, but the board will move the pieces from the opponent for you. We had, let's see, a machine learning project to take a look at, and tag items that were captured from the point of view of it's a robot that a company has that runs up and down the rail systems here in Massachusetts. And they have this huge data set and they need to analyze that. A lot of these different environmental, window systems where you can cool or heat your home kind of passively by changing the state of the windows using environmental sensing. This is a system that flies a plane using a glove. So yeah, just a lot of really fun stuff. And I invite you to take a look at them. This website, I'll put it in the chat. I won't talk about it any longer. I'm collecting all of the high quality video demos that are a video recording that an analog of what was shown at demo days, and I'll put them in a YouTube playlist so that the world can see them. I'll take any questions you have, but it's a really fun experience. There's only one thing that's not fun about it, which is this. When you teach this kind of course, you're always answering the basic questions again and again. By definition, anytime there's an advanced question, once the student knows enough to be able to actually answer that advanced question, you remove yourself from that. Like, you don't need to do that anymore for them, right? They go and do that really cool advanced thing. You're not needed anymore. If they're not capable of doing it independently, you redirect them to doing something a little bit simpler that's more in their level of challenge. So in other words, you, the instructor, never get to do anything really like technically difficult, right? You learn all the skills that I'm learning right now are all just like meta management, thinking about like that kind of stuff. None of it is like, I really wish I could get into more detail, but I can't in good faith actually spend a ton of time reading about the trinamic stepper driver that Team 4 introduced me to. I just have a little note in my brain, trinamic stepper driver, really, really cool to look into further for a personal project sometime. But it's I think very much similar to an experience you have, probably anyone running a makerspace. I'm looking at you, Chris, of kind of like introducing people and then getting them to be independent and then letting them go do the fun part, but kind of not getting a chance to do that part. Which is an interesting one. All right, where's the stop share button?
Anybody got any questions for Shira? Existential crisis, Shira?
I watched the video of the magic chess. That was really cool. How did they make the king tip over?
Oh yeah, so there's an electromagnet that you can, in an H-bridge, you can change which direction you run the current through it. And since the pieces all have a magnet that's in one particular orientation, like axially magnetized magnet, then if it's a black piece or a white piece, the system actually knows which one it is using the Hall effect sensor, and then it can topple it over by running it the wrong way, the electromagnet.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
So what did you learn and to do differently next time? Or what do you think in person will this experience give you? I mean, you said, that Slack was a great thing as far as a resource to be able to really keep tabs on a team, but are there other things that you think you can do better or worse since you've got?
So the first thing is just bringing the entire, like everything, like it's always going to end up with most of the work loaded towards the end of the year, right? Like the students just kind of tend towards doing more of the work later on. So by providing like what I call training wheels, which are like more and more deadlines early on, and then actually having less frequent, fewer deadlines later on, you're kind of like getting people in the habit of doing things in a tight loop. And then hopefully that kind of sinks in and they do that on their own at the end. Because you don't want to have that kind of heart to heart about doing, better time management at the end of the semester. It just doesn't really work, right? At that point, you're just like, you're hoping that they take that as a life lesson for later, but it's not going to change it now. The other one is, while we pushed the PCB this year, and so we had much better results with the printed circuit boards than we did in the past, we didn't yet get a chance to apply the same concepts to system specifications and testing methodology. So if you think about this project, any of these projects, there's such a huge effort that anything we don't place a very strong emphasis on will just have to get pushed aside, right? There's so many different things the students have to do. So anything that we don't actually like explicitly grade or give feedback on, will naturally, they'll see it as a lower priority. And it's like, you know, that's the rational thing to do. They're making a calculation. So if we want them to do a better job with the testing and methodology, we have to incorporate formally into the curriculum how we're going to review that. And so that's our plan for next year. Just because we think that kind of thinking is so important to train everyone on. Beyond that, yeah, we're trying to get the students to brainstorm and form teams during the summer. So that whole, like, you know, find who you want to work with happens before the semester starts. But technically, right, the semester starts on September 1st. So, but just by encouraging them positively, many students, they're very bored this, you know, right now, and they want to reach out to their friends and form teams and think about ideas. So it's a really fun thing for them to do.
It's like a classic, you know, work wants you to work at all times. It's the same thing. Like, you're on summer break, but we want you to work on your projects. Get them started for real life.
For a lot of them, it's social too, right? Like these projects are, like, not everyone really likes doing this, but I think most of the students have a great time. And I actually really enjoy working with them because I've learned a lot. Some of the students, you know, really, like, when I interact with them, it's not like they're getting help from me. I'm asking them questions and I'm learning, which is really refreshing.
Anybody else have any questions for Shira?
I'm curious how, I'm not very familiar with Slack, but I'm curious how you're using that as like a management system to communicate with your students. Or, I mean, you referred to like you using it as getting an idea of what they are. So they're more than just like a name and like, oh yeah, they had this idea. And I guess the second part of that question is like thinking about managing people. Are you creating like to-dos for your students so that they know, hey, MDR is next week, I better have this thing done by Friday because it's due Monday? I mean, are you creating like assignments in that way?
Well, so they have to do these formal reviews. They have to prepare the slide deck. They have to schedule with their evaluators. So these are like non-negotiable deadlines. There's a week, and they have like the week of FPR, final project review. Every team has to complete that final project review. With the exception of when people got COVID, we allowed them to delay it a little bit. No, this did happen. So those are all the assignments. You know, the reviews are really the assignments. The check-ins are there for us to help them and to also just get a quick update. So that's when the course coordinators meet with every team for 15 minutes. Basically, it's a Monday through Thursday, like, block of 2 hours every day where we just sit down and meet. Like, it's a lot of work, but that's just to like give students that kind of push in the right direction if we see that they're deviating from the course, or just like a acknowledgement that they're doing the right thing. And then the Slack, the way we use it is we have 31 channels, one for each team, that's private for the team. So the team talks to us, but not to other teams, right? So you can't see what other teams are doing on their channels. We have a main channel, and then we have a couple of shared channels where students can talk about a topic like Altium and PCB support. So that one was the most popular, like, shared channel. In fact, it was like all students talking there. The M5, the Makerspace, created a series of YouTube channel. Actually, you know, I'll share that YouTube channel link right now. If you're interested in circuit design, and especially, you know, EDA software and using Altium specifically, the video tutorial series that the M5 student staff created are really good. Like, I'm pretty sure our view count is not from UMass. People are watching this video because it's a resource they needed, and now it exists as of this year. So the students who created that video series were on the channel, and they would answer all kinds of questions that students had as things went around. Oh, we also were impacted by the global shortages of components. So one team was thinking about an XMC 4200 or something, some kind of chip from that family. And there were 4,500 in stock on DigiKey, or maybe 900. And they were like thinking about it, and 2 days later, every single one was sold out. And we couldn't find the BME 280. And there were just a couple other things like that that were surprising. And I think I've heard rumor that we're seeing the beginning of that, that there's going to be a huge delay until things get back to normal. So that'll be interesting.
I think the manufacturers who are specifying quick turn components, like, I'm sure Bob knows better than I do, but I know a lot of those parts come out of the factory and they're going to orders, you know, right away. It's not like they sit around. Some of those parts age out, so they need to be used quickly. But I think that the consumer side, like DigiKey's inventory, has got a huge lag. And so if you see DigiKey's inventory vaporizing, then I imagine people are now buying from DigiKey rather than a traditional supplier. And so they go up, these larger companies are probably trickling down. And so as a hobbyist, if you see all your stuff is gone, I imagine that's just on the way in rather than the way out. So it'll get interesting. Maybe Sector's got this strategic junk reserve upstairs.
Yeah, a lot of parts are on allocation, which means that only specific buyers are getting them. And there's lead times are over a year in some cases. And yes, we are just at the beginning of this because mostly COVID was depleting the stocks. And so now the stocks are depleted, but the demand never went away. And so we don't have any stock anywhere. And with natural disasters continuously destroying factories, that's another thing that's killing us.
There's I just started working for a contract electronics manufacturer, and I actually had to watch or do a presentation on counterfeit components because of they made that because of COVID. That it's gotten better, but it's the same shortages. That's what they ran into, was not being able to find them, and the ones they can find are fake sometimes.
We actually see that in our industry where there's a lot of counterfeit parts, even down to capacitors being counterfeit.
Yeah, they had a picture.
Legitimately try to make them look like the real deal.
Yeah, they had a picture of like a large capacitor that had a little capacitor stuffed inside and connected to the bottom. That was like their example picture. So
just posted the link that I just posted. The one where SparkFun bought several thousand at Mega 328s that weren't at Mega 328s.
Oops.
When they were still expensive, like very expensive. Yeah, there's a few instances of counterfeit stuff hitting hobbyists where there was spikes in demand for different components, and people realized like none of the hobbyists were checking into this stuff, and so they could get these parts into distributors, and by the time they trickled down to somebody implementing them, let alone somebody implementing them realizing they weren't doing something wrong but that the chips were bad, it takes a long time, and by then you have no idea where you got the parts from, and they're just gone. So yeah, I guess if you've got some copper slugs laying around and maybe some molding and some spare dies, you could start making a little bit of bank on whatever the in-demand parts are. But I'm sure that's going to happen no matter what.
I mean, pretty much their only mitigation, at least for us, was buy direct from the manufacturer or from a certified supplier or certified reseller, whatever you want to call it.
Any other questions for Shira on anything?
Why Altium instead of KiCad?
I think at some point one of the faculty asked a couple of alum to weigh in about like what was the industry standard choice, and we get a really good deal on a 50 seat license set, and so we went with it.
I think it's a lot of the colleges and even tech colleges and everybody else have to stick to whatever their industry affiliates say they want to hire for skills. And I will say that the skills translate well. I mean, if you know how to use Altium, I'm sure you can figure out how to use KiCad, but it's the other way around isn't necessarily true. Altium's got a lot of simulation, a lot of other things built into it that are not present in KiCad. And I think if you taught the students an open source framework, they may not have the industry knowledge that they need to try and get a job doing it. But that's just the big industry shill for Altium, which I've never used, by the way, so I don't know. All right. Well, thank you, Shira, for sharing.
They're sure lucky to have you there, Shira. That's all I can say.
Yeah, sure. Have any of your students been surprised that you know anything about any of this stuff? Like, is that like you watch them look in horror when they realize like you know what you're doing, or is that not crossed?
No, I've had I don't know. There must have been a couple of students, but I think most of the time it's the reverse. They assume that I know everything at this point, and then they're terrified. Some of them are terrified of me. Like, I'm trying not to seem so terrifying, but there have been a couple moments where I asked a student, like honestly, like earnestly, like, okay, let's draw this circuit. Here's a whiteboard, here's a marker. Let's just draw the circuit for, putting a switch to a microcontroller input, and here's a resistor, where should they go? And I think they were like on the verge of, like, they were trembling, and I was like, oh, what did I do to become so scary? I didn't think I did anything.
Oh, she just got mean since she left.
A little bit, but Chris, you know what it's like.
Oh no, I don't know anything about this. No, not at all. I've never had any of these experiences. That's terrible.
I asked you where the scissors were and like the sarcasm, and I thought about it, and I was like, it must be annoying to be in your seat to be like, where are the scissors, Chris? The drawer that says scissors on it.
That's the best part. Since we moved, I labeled everything, so now it's the best game ever because I can just say, oh, it's in the drawer that says whatever, and it doesn't help at all. But yeah, I mean, and that's totally a failing on my end, and I'm sure that you'll see the same thing where it's really hard to come up with a manual that fits for like an overarching thing. And that's why I haven't done it, because the more that I thought about, like, oh, I could write instructions, or I could write all of the saws in this room are good for these types of things. It just, there's so many edge cases. It's so hard. Your list gets a mile long, then nobody looks at it. And then somebody looks at the first page and goes, oh, I found my thing. And like, no, there's a sub note, section 38 on page 400 that mentions if you're cutting a round thing with a square bar on the end and it doesn't quite fit in the vise, don't do this. I don't know. Yeah. If you figure it out, let me know. I'll hopefully you'll open source all the content. We can figure it all out. That'd be great. But I suppose you can't sell anything, so this is great. You should work really hard on that, Shira, and then.
No, actually, intellectual property is a little bit different, but yeah.
Anyway, thank you for sharing. And yeah, I think it is important to think about the student's perspective and where they're at and where they're coming from, because it's the same challenge. You'll have students who come in, and if you gave them the intro lecture, they would get bored and be like, I don't know why I'm taking this class. And then you go to the next student. If you don't do 3 hours of basic circuit components, then it's just a loss. So it's really hard to do that. So don't feel bad about scaring students, I guess. I know Bob had sent out a message that he had something to share. So Mr. Bob, you want to go? And then if anybody else has something, they're more than welcome to.
Sure. All right. So you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to talk about repairing some brand new DDR pads. So I am a huge fan of Dance Dance Revolution and have been since I was in high school. And in college, I won a PlayStation 2 by doing a DDR contest. So like, I am really into this sport. And for those who haven't seen it before, it's a game where they play music, and then there are these arrows that scroll up, and you have to step on the appropriate pad when the arrow gets to the right spot. So it's sort of like dancing, but you really wouldn't want to do it out on the dance floor. But it's a great workout, and no videos of me playing. Anyway, so the pads that are available for like home use are these really cheap vinyl pieces of crap that slide around all over the place, and they don't record very well, and you can't get them, like, they just suck. So I've been wanting a metal DDR pad for a really long time, and back in December I finally bit the bullet and got myself a Christmas present of 2 DDR pads, and they arrived in January, and they didn't work. So I paid $400 plus 150 for shipping, and these were basically a piece of shit that when it arrived. They didn't sense my feet, and so within the first few like steps, I was super disappointed. We packed it up, and yeah, DDR Game is not the actual company that makes the game DDR. It's just some third-party company. So I had paid a lot of money for these things. I was super excited about it. And then within seconds, I was super disappointed. So I took a pad. I thought, well, should I return these guys or should I take it apart and fix it? And I'm a sector member, so of course I took it apart and realized immediately why these things are so terrible. So this is a picture of what the circuit really looks like. There's a piece of sticky metal tape on one side of the pad, and then fingers on the other side of the pad. And when you step on the plexiglass, then it presses down and makes two fingers touch. And so this is a terrible design for a lot of reasons. First of all, yeah, you can get oxidizing, which is not good. And then it's just foam that holds these pieces apart. And so the foam starts off a little stiff and then eventually becomes so loose that it doesn't do its job anymore, and the buttons are always pressed. And so it's just terrible. And also it only occupies like 6 inches square inside of like a 10-inch square pad. And so you have to step exactly in the middle. You have to step very hard in order to get it to compress. And you have to get step on it with enough surface area that it makes the connection between two of those fingers. And so it was really disappointing. So my first thought was, I was actually going to get some load cells. And it's funny that there was discussion on it at the beginning of this meeting, because I actually got some HX711s and hooked them up and was writing some code to use them as a switch, but then realized that, well, I would have gone all the way with that, but, and then you can actually adjust the delay in the game so that even if there was delay in all of that processing, then it would be accounted for in the game. But it wasn't my favorite option because it required a whole bunch of additional electronics. And so I was fumbling around on AliExpress and found these switches that they were specifically marketed as dance game switches. So I got these things, and that is just a hunk of plastic and some switch, like some, what are they called? I don't even know what they're called. Just some basic switches, and they worked really well. Not all of them worked. So it turned out that where they connect to the wire, some of them didn't connect very well. So fortunately I had some spares, but yeah, so I cut out the foam and put these switches in, and did it around all 4 corners, or all 4 sides. And then it was really handy to be able to just solder directly to that circuit board that had the fingers on them. And so I then covered it up and put the plexiglass back over the top. So now there are 4 additional switches around each side. And it turned out that the height of the foam matched the height of these switch enclosures perfectly. So like I was worried that I would have to do some cutting of the wood underneath, but it turned out that I didn't, and it all just worked. So I was really happy with that, and they became really sensitive, and like you could barely step on them, and they were receptive. So it was perfect. So I plugged them in and started stepping, and it was okay, and then the back button didn't work, and I couldn't figure out why. It wasn't a problem with the electronics, and I had purchased 2 of these things, but only modified one. So I was able to swap it out with the unmodified one, and it also had a problem with the back step. And so I was like, well, crap, this must be the controller. So the controller, I took it apart and immediately discovered a problem. So it turned out, I don't know how this happened, but on the PCB itself, if you look at R4, you'll see that there was a component there, and it is not. And the pad underneath is broken. And then on the picture on the right, the bottom pad on R4 also fell off while I was investigating this. It turns out there was a bubble in the PCB itself. Like it had gotten wet or something, and it expanded into a bubble and blew the resistor off of the PCB. And I don't know what happened. But yeah, so it was a piece of crap. I don't know how it got through their quality control, because when I opened it, that's what it looked like on the left. And yeah, there's probably no quality control. So anyway, I was really disappointed again. And so I purchased some PS2 controllers. And so I got 2 controllers for 12 bucks, and DDR Games sells their box thingies for $22 each. So I was just super pissed that I had paid so much money for crap. But one of the nice things about these PS2 controllers was that they were really well documented. So like on the PCB itself. So everything was labeled. It was pretty easy for me to go through and solder on contacts to what I needed to, and then wire everything to a new connector. And so I soldered it all, ended up using the same enclosure. So I didn't need to make a new enclosure for anything. I just cut a hole in the previous enclosure. And then I reverse engineered that, the connector, and made sure I documented what everything connected to. And that's that's the final controller. And the controller still works, by the way. Like it completely functions. So if you wanted to play DDR with your thumbs, you totally could. Yeah, so now I have a DDR pad that goes to this PS2 controller, and I have modified both of them. And so once I was done, Danielle and I played together on date night, and it worked really well. Like it was perfect. Timing was great. It was perfectly responsive on every step. I didn't miss any steps at all. I was so happy to have fixed this piece of crap that I was really disappointed with when I first purchased it. So one of the reasons that I decided to repair this one instead of send it back and buy something else or make something from scratch was because I felt like the base of this thing was fundamentally okay and better than what I could do if I wanted to build it on my own from scratch. So I knew that I was starting with a decent base, and just modifying it was easier and cheaper in the long run. Well, maybe not cheaper, but less time. So that's where we are now. I now have 2 working DDR mats.
I have a bunch of questions.
Go ahead, sure.
Firstly, what do you play? Do you play DDR? Do you have like an emulator? Do you do Stepmania? Do you pump it up?
So I have a PS2, and I have just been, we have, I think, all of the DDR games. So I've been using that. I used to play Stepmania, but just on my keyboard, like my actual keyboard, because I wanted to retain some like muscle memory. Well, not leg muscle memory, but just like, you know how you get used to the speed of it going by. I just wanted to keep that up with my fingers when I didn't have pads. So yeah, that's it.
I highly recommend Stepmania because once you get through the song library for DDR, right, the nice thing about Stepmania is the ability to make your own step files and play the ones the community's made. And like, there's just a huge community that's really active. This one's not so much a question, but I bought the cheap foam pad. I actually have 2 of them over there, and it works really well. It just needs to be gaffered taped down to a hard surface. Like I have like linoleum flooring in my kitchen, and I use gaffer's tape to tape it there. And one of the things I found an issue with, so I wanted to play traditional DDR, so I went to an arcade. Firstly, like arcades nowadays suck, and they put the DDR next to the Guitar Hero, so you can't play if someone else is playing because like the audio starts to clash. But also they're always broken, and you have to press way hard, so you play differently because you have to, right, without the bar, So when the expert players play, I didn't see you didn't have a bar, so I assume you're actually moving your body weight around, right? But the expert players are just holding onto the bar and tapping their feet. If you want to play without a bar, and there are players that do, notably Cow-Eye on YouTube, you need to be able to press lightly. Unless you're really, really, I guess, heavy. If you're not really, really heavy, you have to stomp, and then you can't go very quickly. So I actually think the foam mats have a huge advantage in that you can make the sensor, you don't have to press so hard to get the sensor to trigger, but you just have to tape it down to the floor so it doesn't move.
Yeah, so you're right. There are different ways of playing, and I don't have the bar. I feel like I want this to be more of a workout, and so I don't mind that I'm moving my whole body. But yeah, the people, I've seen the guys who do it with the bar, and they're just blasting through with 1,200 perfects in a row, and it's just incredible. But I don't think I'll ever get to that point, and I don't really want to. I want to keep it as something fun and like where I'm moving.
Do you play doubles?
Yes. Which you can't really do with a bar.
So did you get a discount or anything from them, given that you've basically re-engineered the entire thing? Or did you just not do anything about it?
I haven't documented this yet. I only just finished. So I am definitely going to document it, probably write a Hackaday article about it. I think that they would not give me a discount since I am hopefully going to destroy their business.
Actually, if you make that Hackaday article, can you make sure to post it to this subreddit? Because people there are always looking for recommendations on what to purchase and what not to purchase.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for the Amazon pitch, Bob. You got the Amazon foo, so I mean, just put the SKU up there and let's see how it goes.
Not worth my time.
So is that actually a piece of foil tape in the middle, or is it like clear looking tape? It's like metal foil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. It's hard to see. So those strips that's what a resistive touchscreen is built out of. There's either micro dots or there's a separator layer in the middle of it. So like your sensor strips are, it's not indium tin oxide because that's transparent, but it's like a sputtered silver coating. And then they do that on both sides of the fingers, and then it just makes contact across a gap. But the downfall with them is getting the crimp to work well, like you noticed where the crimps are bad on them. And that was always the pain. Like you can try tightening them up and they sometimes work and sometimes don't, but they're susceptible to the same thing where you get the oxide on where the tabs actually are piercing that layer and being crimped around. So
okay,
it should be good, but they had a lot of early days robotics touch sensors did the same type of configuration, just fewer of them in a row. And that was always the hassle, is if they got flexed much. So just make sure they're like immobilized so that they don't move on you a lot, and they should be all right.
Yeah, they're all taped down.
Cool. Anybody else play DDR? I've never played myself, but
I play so much.
Well, that's awesome. I know there's a huge community around it. It's cool. I think I remember being in the arcades watching other people play it, and it was always impressive to see, but not a thing that I ever picked up on.
So Bob, I was curious why you left the sensor in the middle and put sensors around the outside versus just kind of getting rid of the main sensor altogether.
So the sensor in the middle, like if it's just connecting 2 points, and so it didn't really hurt to leave it there. And actually, it was helpful in wiring. Let's see. Oh, I'm not going to show the images, but in wiring, it was actually easier for me to take the two ends, or the two sensors in one corner, and solder them to the same points that together, and then the two sensors that come together in the other corner, and wire those to the PCB. So it just made wiring easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I typed in the chat, Sean. They're all in parallel, like every single switch. So there's now 4 perimeter switches times, what was it, 5 per, I think. And then there's the center switch as well. So there's like a buttload of switches. And if any one of them makes a closure, then it counts as a closure. So whichever one hits first will trigger. And then if additional ones come down, I imagine the game, well, it wouldn't see any difference in the voltage level. So
exactly.
So that'll give it a ton of sensitivity.
Are
so
you
Bob,
on
is there like an auto tune version for DDR? You know, just to like, if your rhythm's slightly off, it just auto tunes for you. You know, beginner mode.
Yeah, I think so. At least in Step Mania, I think you can adjust the windows, right?
Yeah, I think you can always adjust the window, but the funny bit is in hardware you could do an auto tune routine. So like if you had a rhythm and you're off a little bit, it would just correct for you. But I guess it would never know which pad touched. It's a joke. You could hide an auto tune in your controller since you've got this like system now.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could make yourself better than you really are.
I'm surprised that there's not a crossover where people play Beat Saber at the same time as DDR.
It's gonna be a new viral video.
Are you on the hunt for a proper cabinet? Like, you know, some salvage cabinet?
No. It wouldn't be portable enough. I want to be able to put this thing away.
I don't know. You could do floor tile, like the big foam floor tile squares, you know, they just like lock together and you could build a cabinet. Could be good.
Last question for me.
Sure.
Have you heard of Dance Rush Stardom?
No, what's that?
Okay, so I thought arcades were dead, but I guess they put a new machine out and it's like a new dance game, but it's an entire giant board and it kind of incentivizes you to shuffle. It's like to do a shuffle. I'll post a video in the chat, but it's like, it's an interesting new dance game. And it's weird that it's hitting arcades in like 2019 because I thought arcades were dead, but I'm gonna check that one out too.
I thought arcades were dead too, but there's this indie game that I think was actually created nearby here, and they had one at the what is that, State Street arcade place, and it's like this 4-player vector game thing. What is it called? Metroids or something? I don't know. It was actually intensely fun. It was kind of a retro throwback but modern twist. It was all pre-COVID.
I think if you want to go drinking, there's plenty of arcades out there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it certainly was on the upswing, and I think that'll sustain given the age of all of us and our relative interest in reliving the arcade experience is my guess.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have anything else they wanted to share?
I can quick demo this toy I made my godson.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, pre-COVID, took my godson down to the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, and he like lost his mind at this display that was like submarine with a bunch of buttons and stuff he could press, but none of it worked. Like none of the buttons actually activated or turned lights on or anything. But he was like 2 and loved it. So I decided I wanted to try to make him something similar to that. Chris, this is my first project doing anything with laser cutter. Chris helpfully pointed out that he probably would like it if it didn't actually do anything in the long run. But I got lucky because the pandemic gave me some extra time to work on this. So instead of giving it to him for his birthday last year, I'm going to give it to him next month. But just made this like mission control board for this little kid to play with that really is just like overstimulating for him. But try to build in as like much as I could to keep a little kid interested with it. So it has like some button sequences hidden in it that will like bring up different patterns for him over time. Different light patterns to it based on what he's touching, or like what switches are activated will change the colors to actuate through different patterns over time. The matrix 8x8 matrix up here has different little bitmap images built into it that then change based on what's active, what switches are on and off. And then I was just messing around with like something simple he could do if both switches are on. So there's just like a little chasing a pixel game thing, like game for a toddler built into it. But yeah, so this is like my quarantine project for the whole time. My wife and I had a kid in February, and I told her I needed to have it finished by the time we had our own kid, and now I guess they can start working on one of these for our child. But yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff built into it just for like surprises over time for him. I built the Konami code into it using the red and yellow button as the replacement for A and B. So as he gets a little older, hopefully he'll find some stuff out, figure some stuff out about it. But
oh my God, if you could mass produce that thing, your backlog on Tindy would be incredible. You could sell those probably for 200 or 300, maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, like it's been a fun project. I mean, I'm hoping this kid likes it, and try to I left the inside open up for him so that he can explore it over time. Maybe eventually use it as a launching point for him to learn something about it. But yeah, so that was my like little quarantine project. I made the big mistake on the back. I laser cutted 2019 into it, and the kid's maybe going to get it this summer. So learned my lesson there about shooting myself in the foot with a deadline. But
conceived of in 2019.
Exactly.
That thing is
actually
amazing.
conceived of 2 years before he was born. So, or 2 years before I'm going to give it to him. When he was 2, he'll get it when he's 4 now, which 4 is probably a way better age to get this anyways than like 2.
I really appreciate the depth that you put into that. Like I noticed your lighting displays aren't just lighting up, they're twinkling and they have variation to them. And you know, the hidden things in there and the color changes are just off the charts brilliant. It's super cool.
Thank you.
Does that hyperdrive, is that an analog display? Does it, oh, that's so cool.
So the dial here activates with that. You push and hold. So this is just randomly selecting a 4-digit number. And if you flip, there you go. It'll move it faster over time. If you push it, it'll stop it at a random number. And then if you push and hold it, it does like this 5-second countdown and does the like launch sequence or like startup sequence where it moves everything in unison here, goes through a pattern on the 8x8 matrix. Yeah. One problem I encountered with it, and I don't know if it was just I messed up something soldering or if it's just something wrong with the matrix display I got, is this Y column, the furthest right Y column was off in the code. I had to like identify that as -1 in the code. So like all my bitmap images and everything are really weird and like don't make sense when they're in the code because I had to like reorient the axis of that. But other than that, so.
Yeah, I didn't want to, I remember helping you make this and I didn't want to ask how many years ago it was. Just I didn't want to throw you under the bus, but.
It was right before the pandemic. No, I'll admit it. Like, you know, it was like going to get it to him. And then also the pandemic happened and I got busy with some work stuff for a while, but ended up being like one weekend at a time. Not having access to Sector was also.
It's farther along than 99% of projects in that it appears totally functional. That's awesome. Yeah. So that's really cool.
It's totally functional. If I had a little more time, I kind of wanted to change the little game on there to like some of those old TI-83 calculator games.
Snake.
Yeah, put like Snake on there or something.
So how old is this kid right now?
He'll be 4 in June.
So it sounds like you have some time. Yeah, I don't know, like how do 4-year-olds play Snake?
If it was in front of them.
So I actually wrote the code that has a really robust debugging interface to it. So I can actually test it all on my computer. So I've actually thought about being able to add to it over time for like additional birthdays. Nice. So I can actually like ensure that I'm getting all the buttons pressed and stuff. It does have a USB port out on the top. So if I wanted to ever expand it, I could actually. So that actually goes into the serial port of the Arduino.
So one word of advice, which is that these young ones they don't understand the fragility of custom one-off projects like this. Nothing at all like this, but I built a little button box for my nephew when he was a baby, and it just had some buttons and lights and buzzers and a keypad and, you know, little things like that, and gave it to him. It had some batteries inside. And I think he had it all of 2 weeks, and my brother gave it back to me destroyed. This thing apparently was used as a projectile numerous times. And so I hope the controlling people of this young person try to protect it a little bit, because this is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I had the advice of one of my good friends was the director of exhibits for a science center. And over the pandemic, I've had a weekly call with him and a bunch of my other friends, and he has told us this like litany of stories from his last 10 years in exhibit design of the most indestructible thing he could build being torn apart by a class of preschoolers within the first like few hours it's on the floor. So he's at least emotionally prepared me for this being ruined. I did try to like reinforce everything on the inside with like extra steel bracket and stuff to support it. But yeah, it was a fun project. I like his parents enough that I didn't put a speaker in it. But I think that's always something I could expand to it when he's a little bit older if I want to annoy his parents, maybe. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Sorry, I was just out talking to the guys. They're just got done compacting all the dirt. So.
And it was a fun project. So.
Yeah, Davey's not here. I'm sure you'll see it on YouTube. He is absolutely obsessed with like button projects. So he has out in his garage, every time he does the scrap night here, he takes all the buttons and he like picks his favorite buttons. And so he's just got a whole wall of all the random buttons from all the stuff that he's collected that he's just like in love with. And so when he's going to see this thing. And
like these arcade buttons, the click on them is really dissatisfying.
Oh yeah. And those are fairly indestructible if they're the real arcade buttons. Chris, didn't you guys get the contract to like do repair on the spaceship thing we did for the Children's Museum?
No, they did talk to us. I remember talking to Tim about that, but I didn't hear from him about anything like that. No.
Oh, okay.
I actually found that when I was looking at like ideas for this project. Did you guys, was that built by Sector? Or?
It's Dennis, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome. That was really cool. But yeah, super cool.
Yeah, Dennis, that was a Sony project, right?
Yeah, Sony sponsored it. It was when the Children's Museum moved. They were going from that tiny little space that, you know, was overpacked with stuff for many years to this giant, giant place. And I just had this idea that like, wow, they're probably looking for projects. So I talked my employer into sponsoring a project, and a couple of coworkers and I put it together. And we envisioned it as a kiosk people would stand around, but then they approached us and said, we have this airplane which is left over from another project, but we have the front part of it, the cockpit part of it. And why don't we build it that the kids go inside of it and then face, you know, the controls. And so, you know, they did some sketches and were like, brilliant. So they took over the cabinetry and we did the electronics and the software. Matt Logan did all the audio software. Mark Sigenthaler did all the sound design, and it's this incredible like MIDI synthesizer, layered textured sound effects. There's so much going on inside that most people don't realize, because like 5-year-olds are just mashing the buttons continuously. But we came up with this really clever.
Even for this, like, I didn't anticipate how difficult. Even for this simple thing, like I didn't anticipate how difficult my code would get to like actually multitask all the lights at the same time and like be able to interrupt everything, or even just like having the countdown work. So like I can't, like seeing that video of the science exhibit or the Children's Museum is incredible. I cannot imagine how complicated that actually got inside.
It was nice because it had an external synthesizer, so at least we didn't have to do the audio synthesis all on the Arduino. It's a fun project, but yeah, as I'm sure you've figured out, they can consume all of your time.
Yeah, I was joking with Nathan when he originally was talking about this. What he said at the beginning was I was telling him, like, you don't need to make any of it work because it's just buttons. All you need is buttons for a child of that age, and then just hammer on the buttons. That's all you got to do. But he's clearly gone way above and beyond the call of duty on display work. It's
going to become an heirloom, I'm sure.
Well, he has a younger sister now that's been born since this was conceived, and now I have a child, so I think I have a laundry list of additional projects coming for me to make. So.
Thank God now you can just do Control-C, Control-V, and make 2 more. No big deal.
I took good notes at least. So.
Well, the laser cutter is working well, so whatever that's worth, that'll be the easy part.
And like I said, if you started mass producing these, you could put those up on Tindy and actually demand a pretty good price, I would think.
Yeah, every ECE dad would buy one for their kid.
Yeah.
Especially if it's programmable. That would be people love to play with that. You just got to get Marcus's cellular modem he was talking about before the meeting, and then you can just push updates whenever you need to, and countrywide.
Well, I think SparkFun has like a kit for like a little crane arm, maybe I've seen. So I actually like would love to do something like that where I could update this and have the USB out on this go to another little base station that has like a crane arm or something that he could program.
I figured you just synchronize it to every SpaceX launch, and then you could do the countdown, you know, and whenever the rocket shoots off, they shoot them often enough now. You could have.
They had one today.
Yes, they did. It didn't even blow up, and I think it landed just fine. So is that right?
If I do that, there's a risk I will never give this to the kids then, and it'll just stay at my desk. So.
So perhaps I'm alone in this, but I think it'd be kind of cool if you actually make it programmable using the buttons in some way, do some fancy stuff.
Yeah, there's all sorts of features you could jam in there, I'm sure. But just like Shira's talking about the DDR community, you got to unleash this on the mission control community and let them, figure out all the add-ons. Well, cool. Thanks for sharing. That's awesome. You'll never cease to be a crowd favorite around here if it's got LEDs in it. So that's never a problem. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share?
You should also share it with Razer because I hear they're fans of LEDs.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice, going thrice. All right, that's all right. Let's see here. I'll share my second. I put together all the videos from the construction outside doing the water main work out here. So they've been trying to get the water main sorted out, and it's been quite the process thus far. So it there you go. So there's a YouTube playlist anyways, but we've basically installed the water main and then repaved the street, repaved the sidewalk, repaved the curb, redid the like gravel and everything, and then leak checked it in fall, and it leaked. And so that was the very last step. And so as a result, they then dug it all up once, tried to look through, tried to figure out where the leak went. It was still leaking in fall, and it was getting cold out. And so they punted, because the issue is if you open up the road, the asphalt plants are all closed for the year. And so you can't repave the road to fix it. And so they are now back again, because in springtime, the asphalt plants are reopened for repaving. And so they've dug up they potholed, is what's called the road. So they basically just dug a small square down. Fun trivia in the city of Madison, you're allowed to dig up to a 5 foot by 5 foot square of pavement. And if you do that, you can patch it. But if you cut in more than 5 foot by 5 foot in a road, then you have to repave 50 feet of road for the full width of the road. And to repave 50 feet of road is about $20,000. So the issue is they've already paved the road once. And so they're very strongly disincentivized from paving the road a second time, because that's a whole ton of money that they're out. So the contract is a fixed bid. So that's basically they put forth a cost. We said, yep, this sounds good. We'd like a water main for that price. And then as a result, until the water main is flowing water, that's the end of it. So that's kind of where things are at now, is trying to get this thing to seal up and pass the leak test. It turns out for sprinkler system service, the leak check is at, I believe, 200 PSI, and it has to hold without leaking for like 15 minutes or something like that. And that's pretty damn high pressure. And it's a 6-inch pipe. So at 200 PSI, that's like multiple 1,000 pounds of thrust load on all the pipe surfaces. So it's kind of a big pain in the ass. So long story short, they've now today dug up the run of pipe again and put in a whole new section of pipe, another 20-foot stick of pipe, to replace a bunch of pieces of patchwork where they had been trying to debug in fall where the leak was. And so now they've got the pipe from the street verified out to the curb verified, and then from the curb back up to the building verified. But it still, as of today, appears to have a leak in it. So it doesn't appear as though we've smashed the leak. So the next choices are either to dig up the street, which is the $20,000 penalty, or to dig underneath our building where they put the 90 degree. So the pipe comes in underneath and then comes up to go up through the floor. The problem is when you have a 6-inch pipe, if you discharge all the water out of the pipe kicks. And so the way that your pipes are built in the street is they're just socketed together. So like one pipe slides inside a rubber joint in the bell of another pipe. And if the water pressure kicks, it can just pull the pipes apart because there's nothing to hold them together. And so they poured concrete on the underneath the building to hold the end of the pipe in place, where that makes this 90-degree turn because all the water reaction force turns and can kick the pipe out. So the problem is they now have this 90-degree elbow caked in like a cubic yard of concrete underneath our foundation. And so if the leak is indeed there, then we've got to dig underneath the building, get in there with the jackhammer out all the concrete, and then put a new 90 in and put it back together again. So, so yeah, anyway, that's where that's at. However, the sprinkler lines you can see above me, it's washed out by the light there, but there's these black lines here. Those are the sprinkler distribution pipes. So they're like 2-inch pipes throughout the building that'll provide water service if there's a fire to activate the heads. Contrary to popular belief, they all do not turn on at the same time. That was a question I've gotten multiple times from people, is like, you don't want sprinklers because if one head goes off, like, doesn't your whole building flood? And like, no, it just floods wherever you've got a fire. And they're activated at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So if a section of the pipe hits 200 degrees Fahrenheit, it heats up and expands this little glass tube. It shatters, and then the water pressure shoots up into a diffuser that sprays in a big pattern and soaks the hell out of everything anywhere nearby. So
if that happens accidentally, can you turn it off?
Yeah, so there's a big ass valve, and the valve is supposed to be chained open, or chained open, sorry. We will tie a bolt cutter to the chain that holds the valve shut because it doesn't make any sense. And then yeah, if the system discharges, you can close the valve and then it would shut off. The good news is that all the sprinkler heads are aimed upwards. And so if the system discharges, all the water stays in the pipes as soon as the pressure is turned off. So if you shut the pressure off at the valve, it'll immediately stop spraying and stop leaking because the head is stopped. The only thing I don't know, I think there's a check valve going upstairs so that the water won't drain from the whole system upstairs back through if there's a head down here that went off. But I don't know that for sure. So there's a possibility that you still drain, like, I don't know, several hundred gallons of water if anything opens up until you get your finger up in there and close it off.
Is it required to flush the lines every so often, or do they just sit there?
They basically just sit there. And that's one of the issues with the sprinkler system, is that because they're just sitting there, they have air trapped in the pipes, and the air to water exchange turns into corrosion. So the pipes sit and corrode anywhere that there's air trapped relative to water. And so you end up getting holes through the pipes at some point. So the idea then is that you want your pipe to be kind of all at the same plane so that you don't have like a high spot in the pipe, because the high spots collect air. So you want your air to be distributed throughout the system, so the corrosion is distributed throughout the system, so it doesn't just corrode in one spot. But yeah, that's definitely a problem. And I did ask them about that. Like, do they have to go into the bucket and like drain each pipe when it first gets charged to get all the air out? And they said, no, the water pressure alone eventually dissolves all the air into the pipe, or into the water that's in the pipe. And it basically just gets equilibrated over time. But who knows whether that's actually the case. They said there's like a foot of compressed air on the end of all the tubes.
Here's the important question. How high can you stack shelving units underneath them for it to still be appropriate for fire code?
So our most critical calculated area is the upstairs where the pallet racking is stacked up, and our ceiling up there is 18 inches or 18 feet tall. So we can have 18 feet worth of rack. However, you have to be 18 inches below the head. So the sprinkler head is here. Your crap can be piled to 18 inches below that to allow the water to distribute over top of whatever's burning. Other interesting trivia, there are then limitations on what you can store. So the difficult to protect thing is meltable plastics that turn into a pool fire. So if you have like acrylic perhaps stacked up or ABS plastic stacked up, those two plastics, or polyethylene, any of those things, are all high flammability plastics, and they melt and form a pool. So if you have like a pallet up on a shelf and it gets hot, all the plastic melts and runs out of the pallet, and then it falls on the floor and it makes a really intense fire because it's now strung from wherever it was to wherever it is now. So they require that the plastic is stored 6 feet or below if you're going to have an accumulation of certain types of plastics. Wood is like no problem. Metal obviously is no problem. Oils don't really factor in a big way. It's really plastics. Accumulation of plastics is the biggest concern. So in the engineering on this thing, there are some requirements about how things are stored, where they're stored, quantities that can be stored on volumes or on weights. So that's how a lot of fire code is done. Is like if you have a package of plastic, the package can be by weight a certain distribution or by volume a certain distribution, but it has to be under a certain amount of plastic. So for instance, if you have a product that you fulfill, it's got a cardboard outer shell, then it might have plastic packaging inside of it and then the product inside of that. And so in order to not turn that packaged product into a high hazard product, which then requires totally different fire protection system, there are requirements around code on how much of the volume can be a product and what the product can be composed of and what the packaging can be composed of, and what the cardboard outer box can be composed of, and like how those things stack up. So it's interesting because you think about a toy store, like what would a toy store land at, or what would Walmart, land at? So there's actually implications in a lot of places that you go, like retail and commercial operations, where technically to meet fire hazard, they have to be certain distributions of the products and things, which might be why some shelving in stores, like Walmart is like a 40-foot high space, right? But they don't store plastic crap 40 feet tall. They have limitations on the heights of things. I would imagine part of that actually is fire protection, now that I know a lot more about fire protection than I ever wanted to. So yeah, there's some interesting things that way.
Is the document you're reading like a federal thing, or is it like a Wisconsin state fire code thing?
It's National Fire Protection something. So it's NFPA. NAFTA? Let's see. I think it's 13. 72 is the fire alarm and signaling systems. And then I think NFPA 13 maybe. Yeah, 13 is the standard for sprinkler system installation.
Did they let you download the PDF? Or did you have to scrape it from the in-browser view where they don't let you download it?
I don't have any of that actually, because we had to, so you have to hire somebody to do all of the work regardless. We tried as best as we could to we'll hang the pipes if you do all the design work, or we'll, install things or cut things or build things or do whatever we can to not pay you to do things. And yeah, that didn't go anywhere, because it has to be done, has to be installed by a certified contractor, has to be designed by a professional fire protection engineer, all that kind of fun stuff. So and I am looking for the design itself.
So random fun fire fact, regular beams in houses, it I think takes about 15 minutes for them to be compromised in a fire. They do the new engineered I-beams, and those take about 5 minutes. So it's actually recommended in a lot of houses nowadays that they actually put sprinkler systems in. But obviously, with the cost of it, it doesn't tend to happen much, just in single family homes.
Yeah, those blue laminate beams are like firefighter killers. Those are pretty scary to be around.
Yeah, so the funny bit then is I think about our old building. And our old, it was like an 1890s barn that had multiple iterations of construction, building in, building out, building around. And then they boxed in areas, which is another big hazard, because then it conceals fire. So you can have a fire in this inner area between two ceilings. So the ceiling's being compromised while you're in a room, not even knowing it's burning because there's drywall between you and it. So there's all kinds of fun things to think about that way. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. Let me grab the plans because they're over here on a table. It'll be easy. I'll just hold them up. I'm not sure. I don't have them downloaded on my email, so hang on. I'm sure these guys in the morning will be like, where the hell did that flange go? I had it sitting right here. Anyway, so these are the plans. it's basically just like the building itself, and then each one of the highlighted things is completed. And so you can kind of see they're just running pipes at like 15-foot increments. And then they have each one of the little tiny like symbols here is a head. And so they have just a head distributed. So the heads are like every 15 foot. And so essentially each head gets like 15 foot worth of coverage. And then it gets complicated like in the wood shop where they have to run it underneath shelves and things like that. And then upstairs, they're running a different direction. So now they run east to west instead of north to south. And so they kind of try to lay out the system to minimize the amount of work and like changes in direction and things like that. So yeah, so they had to do the calculations on the second floor as their like hardest to protect area because it has the storage stacked up real tall. The building itself is really tall. And so the fire can get really high, which then means you have to be able to knock it down. So the upstairs piping is bigger because the building ceiling and stuff is bigger and there's more material stored. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing when they do the design work that way. And then as they're going throughout the building, the pipes come pre-rolled. So they designed all this stuff and like ordered all the pipes. And so to me, looking at it, it was like, how the hell are you guys going to manage to do all this design perfect with all the crap we have hanging all over the place? And how are you going to get it to fit without having any collisions or interferences? Because normally when you have a new building, it's all engineered at the same time. And our building is kind of new, kind of not new. And so there's just no consistency to how anything's done. So the long story short is they order all the stuff hoping that they get 90% of it right. And then the last 10% they do by hand. So the pipes themselves, this is just a piece of steel sprinkler pipe. So it's schedule 10, which if you're familiar with pipe fittings, schedule 40 is your normal pipe. And then schedule 80 is like the ultra thick murdering pipe, like super duper thick, really heavy. And then a schedule 10 is like really thin. So this is not a thick pipe. It's not really very thick at all. And it's rated at 300 PSI. So this little tiny pipe is, and the difference is that this pipe is actually steel. It's not like cast, which the regular plumbing pipes are like kind of like crap metal. And these are like high quality steel metal. The fun feature then here on the end is this is a rolled portion of the pipe. So to do the fittings, to make the fittings cheap and easy, and also more importantly, to make it so that you can put this pipe in and you can take the pipe out and you could like switch it out if you want to. Because if you assembled a bunch of plumbing fittings, if you guys have ever built plumbing stuff, it's a pain in the ass. Like you thread the thing together and the length changes. And then if you did that for the whole building, the length would stack up differently as you went if you're like off by a thread on every single fitting. So what they do to combat that is they just roll the pipe. And so there's a pipe roller and it just literally smashes the crap out of this pipe to make a divot. And then the fitting itself has a seal in it. And so that seal just clamps on to the rolled part and locks it in. And then you put your pipe on the other side and you lock that in. And then you, best as I can tell, you hit this thing with an impact wrench as long as you want until it just flattens out completely. And you can see that this fitting has stops built in. So if you over tighten it, this metal just hits here and it bottoms out to prevent you from really smashing this gasket. So the fitting itself just crushes down and then it'll just stop compressing when the gasket is appropriately smashed. And that's all they're doing. So it's just put the pipe up, put this gasket thing on, run it with the impact until it's totally flattened out. Like you can see this one. And then you're good to go. And I'm going to find out when they pressurize it for the first time how many of these leak. You can see the casting isn't particularly clean. So this is a cast turn. And so it just looks like a kind of cast pipe. It's just a piece of cast iron, ductile cast iron. And that's the whole magic of it. So that's all that's up there. And if one of the head goes off, you unscrew it and you replace it. So you don't replace the little glass vial in it. You just throw the whole head away and put a new one up. Is how those work. And there isn't really any more to it besides that. And the engineering part of it, obviously, to evaluate. So he's got in the, there's terms written into here, like on the plan and also on the design that he's given us. And so some of this text is like, these are things you can and can't do. All the sprinkler heads are laid out in this chart. And so it describes like specific flow rates and locations of all of them and pipe sizes and all kinds of stuff for the standards and the codes that they meet. So it's there's definitely engineering that goes into it. The assembly though is like not too crazy. And the fun bit is the designation for like when they hang these, because this is all got to hang from the ceiling, right? So the weight that this thing has to hold up is the weight of the pipe filled with water. So if you fill up the pipe with water, that's your weight of your pipe, plus 250 pounds. So anybody could guess what 250 pounds is?
Drunk student.
There you go. The person who fell off the ladder who grabbed the sprinkler pipe to not plummet to the ground. And so that is what 250 pounds is. So the anchor spacing is set to hold up the pipe plus 250 pounds of a person hanging from the pipe. So I would not recommend hanging from sprinkler pipes, but conceptually they should not fall down if you choose to do that.
It sounds like you're recommending we hang from the pipes.
Someone has to test them.
That is true. Yes, you may want to consider that. Although that U-Haul video that got sent out where the guy totally plowed into the sprinkler pipe, that was certainly a good way to test out the plumbing pipes. Where is that? Oh, it's disappeared from the internet or Twitter already.
That was a great video.
I was gonna say, I'm sure half the people, yeah, they like deleted that tweet. It's a video of a person pulling into a parking garage with a U-Haul, and they like run into the sprinkler pipe, which is like dead center on the camera, and it like goes up, and then they back up and run into it again, and then the thing starts spraying water everywhere, and then they start.
It just keeps getting better and better. Like they should have just backed up, but no, they turned and there was curbs on both sides. And they doubled down on that by just gunning it into the curb until the thing was perpendicular. And when you think that it's going to be over, the pipe starts spraying out brown water and the person gets out of the truck. It just keeps getting better and better and better. It was hilarious.
I found the link. I put it in the chat. I think the person panicked like really hard and was not thinking rationally.
So thanks, Chris. That was fun. Davi here. How do they tap in the sprinkler heads?
Yeah, so the pipes, I didn't grab one, but the pipes are they're pre-manufactured. So the company in Chicago that made the pipes to send them up here, like the company they bought them from, they drill a hole through the pipe wall and then they weld a stub on. So it's essentially just a steel pipe with those rolled ends. And then there's a hole bored through it, and then they just weld on a female threaded fitting, and then the male sprinkler head threads in, and that's it. And so hopefully those are all at the correct locations, because these guys on site are not welding anything together. So I think if they had to like put in a head, they would be drilling a hole through the pipe and then using like a saddle fitting to saddle on to seal on a new fitting. And that's what they would end up doing. Or ordering a new pipe, I suppose that would work too.
Thanks.
Any other fire protection questions? I know far too much now. I have to spread the knowledge.
Are there
No, go ahead.
Are there alarms in addition to? Is it just the vial fuse thing, or are there also sound alarms?
So, Wisconsin code requires, unlike many other states, a smoke alarm system, and in tandem with your fire sprinkler system, like your fire suppression system. And they require that your system be professionally monitored 24/7 remotely. So what will end up happening then, unfortunately, the internet has beaten down the cost of professionally monitored security system. It sounds like it'd be expensive, but it's like $15 a month. And all it is a phone line that dials out and says like, valve A has opened. And the alarm company would then map valve A as, oh, it's your fire alarm is going off, or your sprinkler system is discharging. And so in most states, you are not required to have electronic monitoring until you get like a certain size or whatever else. In Wisconsin's case, there's a flow valve. So what happens when the sprinkler starts to discharge is there's a big plastic flap in the pipe, and the plastic flap gets pulled, and it's literally just a cherry switch. So the switch just toggles and it's on, and then that sets off the alarm to notify remotely that your system is discharging. And then you have to have a smoke alarm and or a thermal alarm system as well.
So that third-party company that waits for that phone call, what do they have to do when they get that call?
So they call whatever number that you've designated. And if it's an alarm system, if they called you, you're required to give them a code. to verify that you are really the person they're supposed to talk to, so that someone else isn't spoofing your phone number. So if we had a bank and the bank security alarm went off and they called my cell phone, but somebody SIM spoofed my cell phone number, so they answered the phone and said, "Oh, hey, this is Chris. No, it's cool. I just hit the door on accident. The alarm's going off, but I'm here. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." And no, if it keeps going off, it's totally fine. No problems at all. Don't worry about it. Don't even think about it. So the security company instead calls me and says, "Hey, what's the passcode?" And I say 1234, and they say, "Okay, cool. Hey, so your alarm's going off. Do you want us to ignore it or not?" And so then that's the end of it. And in the case of the fire system, it's the same thing. They would call and say, "Oh, hey, are you aware that your sprinkler's going off?" And if I said, "Yep, I'm getting soaked with brown and black water right now," go ahead and ignore it. They could do that. Or if they didn't get an answer, then when they would call the fire department and say, "Hey, we have an alarm at XYZ building. You guys should go check it out." And then probably a cop would get here first and then figure out what to do after that. But if it's a fire alarm and you hadn't had one in the past, they're probably going to send a full response.
But the smoke detector and like alarm system is completely separate from activating the sprinklers. The sprinklers only activate with heat.
That's
the smoke
correct.
detectors could go off all day in the kitchen.
Yep.
And as long as it's not heat degrees, the sprinkler's not going to activate.
Yeah, so the heads all activate at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's configurable. So if you had like a factory that had no air conditioning, got really hot, really hot above, a foundry machine or something, you could set up those heads to activate at 500 degrees or whatever you wanted. It's totally arbitrary. Conveniently, you could replace all your heads, and make them so they'll never go off anyways. But technically, you have a sprinkler system. But I think in code, again, it's, you have to put in the minimum to meet the hazardous situation. Then the second tier is, you can have smoke detectors and you can have thermal detectors. Same exact thing. Like in a wood shop, you'd never put in a smoke detector because it would detect all the dust in the air. So you'd cut one board and your smoke alarm would go off, and you'd cut another board and your smoke alarm would go off. And so instead you have a thermal detector, and it's the exact same thing, only it's generally set to a temperature below the sprinkler discharge to give you a chance to do something about it. Because you don't want your smoke alarm or your thermal alarm going off at 250 degrees Fahrenheit when the sprinkler head's already discharging. So you can tier your response, that way. They also have fancy thermal imaging cameras. The exact same thing. Maybe you have an environment that's very hard to monitor. So like it's a environment that doesn't have a solid ceiling to trap heat or to trap smoke. In which case, like on recycling plant floors, there may be like no sane way to monitor an area that's like partially indoors and partially outdoors and blowing all the smoke away or whatever because the building's not enclosed, but you still want to know, like, is my plant on fire? Is there a fire down below or whatever that way? So they instead set up thermal cameras that can survey a wide area, but aren't required to have that heat get trapped somewhere or have the smoke get trapped somewhere to set off a response. There's different concerns that way. So there's a video online of an automated fire turret that responds, that's got a thermal camera on it, and it responds with a jet of water to put out a fire, again, for like a high hazard or a special situation. So there's all sorts of fire protection options for different types of configurations.
So what kind of alarm are you going to put right above the 3D printers for those all-night prints?
I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised their flash forges haven't melted down and lit on fire yet. So I mean, there are a variety of things. I will say having a sprinkler system is good. I know Kate knows all the stats on a sprinkled building is much better than an unsprinkled building.
Yeah, I believe this is true, that there has not been multiple deaths in a building with sprinklers where the sprinklers actually worked, which is like a huge statement. Like that's saving so many lives. That's a big deal. There have been single deaths. Notice I said multiple deaths. So.
So it also should lower the insurance cost, I think. I don't know. We'll find out. In which case, in the long run, it'll pay for itself.
Chris, what's with the offset clamp of, when you put two sprinkler pipes together? Why aren't they just like, I mean, it's the same part, right? But it's like it's not clamping in the center, it's clamping offset. Right?
Oh, like
it's not two half moons, it's like two J's.
It looked like there was actually an angle to it as well. Yeah.
So, you're talking about this guy here? Like,
where the bolts are.
So the bolts are...
Yes. Well, the fact that it's not just two half circles. they're like, if you look at side profile, they're clamping at just, you know, they're offset. It's the same part flipped around. But
so what it is it's to allow for misalignment. So the let me pull one of these off. I'll show you. Probably voiding the warranty, by the way. Don't tell anybody. So what it's doing is if the pipes are misaligned, this bolt is actually floating. So it only is applying compression, but there's no alignment feature to the bolt. So the bolt is floating in an oval. So this bolt then is way smaller than the hole that's available. So that if your pipes are like coming disjoint, this clamp will still clamp tightly and still hold it down. And it also means that as it tightens up, this thing could fully seat and then actually shift to even squish even farther, which is the reason for the wedge. So that it's essentially the bolt is continuing to pull, and all it's doing is it's actually distorting the rubber by doing this twist up until the point where you run out of ovalized clamp. So that's actually a clever design to allow this thing to clamp even harder by twisting to take up any compliance that's left in the pipe joints, while allowing some compliance here up to a point. Obviously, you don't want this thing to clamp like two crazy looking things, but that's why when the delivery drivers smoked into the sprinkler pipes, they had just moved up, like they physically just lifted up like a foot and didn't immediately go off because they didn't smoke one of the heads or break a joint, which gave me a little bit more confidence in these clamps holding. Actually, when I saw the video, I was like, oh, sweet. So if somebody lifts a forklift up into that, it might not immediately dump thousands of gallons of water everywhere. So there's a chance. You're telling me there's a chance.
It's interesting you posted that 3D printer link. I hadn't used my printer for a while and fired it up to do a project a couple of weeks ago, and the heated bed would not heat. And, you know, it's a home built thing that a friend of mine built. And I was like, interesting. So I shut it all down and pulled the power and flipped it around and started studying it. And there's two feeds from the power supply to the board that are 12 volts and they're heavy wire. And one of them, I was tugging on them to see what's up. And one of them, the two wires just pulled right out of this connector. And of course they're adjacent and they're 12 volts at many amps. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I did that. And it didn't just do that on its own in the middle of a print. That would have been bad.
Yeah, the crimp quality and actually the connector body quality are really common failures on all these 3D printers, because the companies manufacturing the printers, of course, are picking the like lowest budget connectors they can buy. And so the connector manufacturer is saying like, oh, this thing's rated at 50 amps or whatever, 10 amps, whatever it is. But it's contingent on the crimps are crimped properly on the wires and making a good connection to the mating pin, so that your company is selling the connector, and then now some 3D printer manufacturer is buying some random headers, and then they're sticking them together, and the pin might be slightly too big for the headers, and so that's a slightly bad connection. And then you add a little bit of heat, because now that connection's bad and it's heating up and heating up and heating up, and now the body of the connector is made of a plastic that's supposed to have really high temperature tolerance and doesn't, so it starts to melt, and then your connection gets worse and worse and worse. And so we've seen that on almost all of our 3D printer beds, that the connectors have failed on basically all of them. And generally, I'll take the connector off and just solder it, because there's no reason at all not to just solder the wires, except for when they were manufacturing, it's faster, because there's no other reason to ever take the bed out.
And they are soldered on my bed. It's just on the power supply connection to the brain.
Well, I have to say I'm jealous of the fire sprinkler system. I'm working on getting one. I'm really trying. I think there's no end to, I mean, you think about the ways that a fire could start. There's just so many. And I think it's like the most valuable piece of equipment that you have. It's really actually really cool.
Well, that's the best part. See, without that, 6-inch water line outside, I mean, it's not really doing anything. It just looks like a fire sprinkler system. So it's actually kind of interesting. They, when they started doing the sprinkler installation, it really lit a fire under the water main guys to actually get the water main done, because the fire department gets really upset if a building appears to have a sprinkling system when it's not actually working. And that's like the worst possible thing. So yes, it's not a good outcome if that's the case, because apparently people are more reckless in buildings with sprinkler systems, which would make sense. So
it's like the helmet hoax. Wasn't there a sticker on the side of the drill press?
Yeah, we got the drill press from somebody who had an interesting choice in stickers. Or it's the bandsaw on the machine shop. Anybody have anything else they want to share?